I sat there in the middle of a warm room filled with the aroma of roasted meat and cinnamon cookies, my heart brimming with excitement like a child waiting for Christmas presents. It was December 22nd that year, the year I thought would bring the most perfect Christmas of my life. I, Adam Walker, 27 years old, was just an ordinary warehouse technician in St. Louis, working hard from dawn till dusk, repairing machinery and organizing goods. My life was simple. No drama, no storms. But that night, everything changed forever. Our dinner table was packed with relatives. My parents had been preparing since morning. Twinkling lights hung everywhere. A towering Christmas tree adorned with glittering glass ornaments glowing under candlelight. Everyone was laughing and talking loudly, sharing old stories, showing off their kids, bragging about their jobs. I sat next to my mother, Mary Walker, 56, a gentle accountant who always smiled and worried about everyone. She was telling the story of my and my older brother's first Christmas, her voice warm and full of love. My father, George Walker, 61, owner of a small auto repair shop on the outskirts of town, sat at the head of the table with his usual stern patriarchal expression. He did not talk much, but when he did, it sounded like an order, and everyone listened. The whole family was eagerly waiting for my older brother, Daniel Walker, 34, a police officer. He was the pride of the family, the hero with a shining badge and crime-fighting stories that everyone loved to retell. Daniel had promised to come early for the party and bring a few good bottles of wine. "Honey, this is the first year everyone is here together. This Christmas is going to be so much fun," my mom whispered to me, squeezing my hand tightly under the table. I nodded, grinning from ear to ear. I loved Christmas. The feeling of the whole family gathered together, forgetting all the daily fatigue. Suddenly, the sound of sirens pierced the distance, tearing through the cozy atmosphere. At first, I thought it was a fire truck or something, but the sirens grew louder, accompanied by the roar of engines. Everyone looked toward the window. "That must be Daniel Aunt Helen," exclaimed with a big smile. "He always loves making a grand entrance." The whole family laughed, stood up, and started clapping, thinking my brother was bringing colleagues to the party like he sometimes did. But then through the window I saw a patrol car screech to a halt right in front of the house, its red and blue lights flashing like angry eyes in the falling snow. My heart pounded. Something strange crept into me. Why like this? Daniel stepped out of the car, his face cold as stone, not a trace of a smile. Behind him were several other officers holding flashlights and radios crackling with static. The relatives were still cheering and clapping, but then Daniel's expression made the entire room fall dead silent. The warm atmosphere froze instantly, as if someone had flung open a window and let the icy wind rush in. Daniel pushed the door open and stepped inside his polished black boots, stepping onto the red Christmas rug. He scanned the room with sharp eyes that stopped on me. My heart clenched. "Everyone listen up," he said in a flat, emotionless voice. "I received an anonymous tip that Adam is in possession of illegal substances. I have to investigate and clear this up." Those words fell like a bomb exploding in the peaceful room. A heavy silence descended. Only someone's choked sob could be heard in the corner. The whole family looked at each other, then at me, eyes filled with confusion and fear. Anonymous possession of illegal drugs. Me. I froze in place, mouth agape, my brain paralyzed. "What are you talking about, Daniel? Are you joking?" I stammered, my voice trembling. But my brother did not smile, did not blink. He looked at me, voice still ice cold. "Adam, come with me to the car for a search. It is procedure to prove you are innocent." I shook my head frantically, my feet rooted to the floor. "No, I did not do anything." "Who made the anonymous call?" "This is a mistake." My mother gripped my hand tightly, her face pale as death. "Daniel, what are you saying? Adam could never." But Daniel raised his hand to stop her. "Mom, let me do my job. If it is just a misunderstanding, even better. Adam, come with me." The whole family started murmuring and standing up. Relatives whispered, "What on earth is happening? It is Christmas Eve. Adam has never made enemies. How did he get dragged into something this bizarre?" My father stood up, face grave, but said nothing. He just nodded at Daniel as if giving silent approval. I was gently pushed toward the door by Daniel, my legs heavy as lead. The whole family followed, crowding into the front yard under the light snowfall. Neighbors began pouring out of their houses, filling the gate, pointing and staring. The flashing patrol lights illuminated the entire street, turning our yard into a stage for a tragic play. Daniel ordered his subordinates. "Check Adam's car first. Trunk and jacket pockets." The officers rushed forward like hunting dogs. They opened the trunk of my old car parked on the curb. And then, God, they pulled out small, opaque white packets that glittered under the flashlight beams. "Care to explain what this white powder is?" one officer asked triumphantly. I shook my head, my voice breaking. "It is not mine. I do not know anything about it." But they continued searching the pockets of the jacket I was wearing and pulled out several more packets. The flashlight beams illuminated each package, making them look like tiny monsters. While my entire family watched in stunned silence, the relatives started whispering loudly. How could Adam do something like that? He always seemed so gentle. He is such a kind, caring boy who helps everyone. I heard every word, each one cut into my heart like a knife. I had never been involved in anything bad. I was just a normal guy who liked reading books, fixing cars, with Dad hugging Mom every night. Why was this happening? Who made the anonymous call? Who set me up? My mother. Mary covered her face and sobbed uncontrollably. Her shoulders shook as if her entire world was collapsing. "Adam, my son could never do something so terrible," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. She rushed forward to hug me, but an officer gently pushed her back. I wanted to hug her, wanted to scream that this was a mistake, but my hands trembled and would not move. My father, George, stood motionless beside the car. His eyes were empty, staring into nothing. I looked at him desperately. "Dad, Dad." I did not do anything. Someone framed me. I stammered in denial, my voice lost in the cold wind, but he said nothing. He just leaned on the car roof as if none of this concerned him. My heart ached sharply. "Dad, why are you silent? Why are you not defending me?" In the face of that clear evidence, my pleas drowned in the freezing Christmas air. The joyful laughter from earlier was replaced by malicious whispers. Neighbors crowded around, filming with their phones. "Look, Adam is getting arrested. Drugs. The Walker family is finished. They turned my humiliation into entertainment, like watching a real-life drama. I felt like a hunted animal exposed before the crowd. Then Daniel stepped forward and took out handcuffs. "Adam Walker, you are under arrest for possession and distribution of illegal narcotics." He repeated his voice completely emotionless, as if reading a warrant to a stranger. I struggled, crying out, "Daniel, you have to believe me. I did not do this. This is some kind of conspiracy." But the officers pinned me against the car hood and cuffed my hands in front of the entire family and neighborhood. The metallic click echoed cold as the ice outside. My mother rushed forward again, clinging to me and screaming, "Daniel, you cannot do this to your own brother. Adam is your little brother." She cried until her voice was hoarse, clutching my jacket. She would not let go, her tears soaking my shoulder. The family stood around us. Relatives tried to intervene, but the tension was suffocating. Suddenly, my father stood straight and said coldly, "Mary, be quiet. Let the law do its job." She stared at him in shock, then released me, stepping back with tears streaming down her face. I went pale and gave up completely. Why would Dad say that? Why was my brother doing this? I let the officers push me into the patrol car amid the flashing lights and venomous whispers in the yard. Snow fell gently, but I did not feel cold. only a burning pain in my chest. The Christmas dinner turned to ashes as the car pulled away, taking me from the warm house into the darkness of the most horrifying Christmas night of my life. Through the window, I saw my mother collapse in tears, the relatives standing frozen, and my father. He just stood there, his gaze as cold and empty as stone. I kept thinking about that anonymous call. Someone had reported me. Someone had planted the drugs. But why did Daniel believe it so instantly? He was my brother. Sitting in the car, handcuffed, I tried to think. How did those drug packets end up in my pockets? I clearly remembered putting on this jacket this morning. There was nothing unusual. The trunk had been locked since last night. Someone framed me. But who and why Daniel was my brother, the person I had looked up to since childhood? Why was he doing this? Was he forced? No. His face had been completely cold, without a trace of hesitation, the anonymous call. Was it just an excuse? The car drove through the familiar streets of St. Louis, the pale yellow streetlights shining on the white snow. I thought about my life. 27 years old. No wife, no children, just a stable job and a family. I was kind. That is what everyone always said. I liked helping people, fixing neighbors' cars for free, bringing food to the homeless in the park. Why had fate thrown me into this hell? My heart raced, cold sweat pouring out despite the freezing winter night. The patrol car stopped in front of the police station, a grim gray building with black iron bars looming menacingly under the flickering neon lights. The officers yanked me out of the car, their hands gripping my arm so tightly it felt like they were afraid I would bolt. I stumbled forward, my legs heavy from the handcuffs and the fear gnawing at every cell in my body. "Move it! Walk now!" one officer barked, shoving me through the main doors. Inside, the air was thick and oppressive, reeking of burnt coffee mixed with sweat and old paper. They marched me down a long, echoing hallway. The sound of boots on the floor rang out like the drums of doom. They shoved me into a holding cell, a narrow, freezing, damp little box. 4 gray concrete walls, a hard metal cot with a paper-thin mattress, and a filthy toilet in the corner. The iron door slammed shut behind me. The lock clicked like a final verdict. I collapsed onto the cot, hands still cuffed, my mind spinning with everything that had just happened. The warm Christmas dinner, the relatives' laughter, the smell of roasted meat, then the sirens, the flashing lights, those unfamiliar packets of drugs pulled from my pockets and trunk. Who framed me? Where did that anonymous call come from? Daniel, my own brother. Why did he do this to me? I shook my head, trying to chase away the chaos in my thoughts, but they kept crashing over me like violent waves. That night stretched on forever. I could not sleep. I just lay curled up, shivering from the cold. Wind whistled through the tiny barred window, carrying the bite of snow. Screams echoed from the next cell. Someone retched loudly. A guard's radio crackled with static. I thought of Mom. She must be at home right now, sobbing uncontrollably, trembling. She had always been my safe place, shielding me from Dad's harsh words ever since I was little. And Dad, his silence was like stone. That empty stare haunted me. And Daniel, the pride of the family, had now become the one who threw me into prison. Tears rolled down my cold cheeks, hot and stinging. I prayed, begging for this to be nothing more than a nightmare, that tomorrow morning I would wake up in my warm bedroom. But the next morning, reality was even crueler. The clank of the lock jolted me awake. 2 officers entered, hauled me to my feet without a word, cuffed me again, and marched me down the hall to an interrogation room. That room was colder than the cell. Old wooden table, hard metal chairs, and a one-way mirror. I knew someone was watching through. 2 detectives were already waiting, one tall and broad with a thick beard, the other skinny and wearing glasses. They read my file in flat, mechanical voices. Adam Walker, 27 years old warehouse technician arrested for possession and distribution of illegal narcotics. They turned on the camera. The red light blinked like a demon's eye. Then they laid out the packets on the table, those opaque white packets gleaming under the fluorescent lights. I sat across from them, heart pounding. I did not do anything. I blurted out immediately. "Those are not mine. Someone planted them on me." I repeated it over and over, voice shaking but determined. I told them everything. The Christmas party, the anonymous tip, the search of my car and jacket. But the two detectives just smirked. Everyone who comes in here says the same thing, the bearded one sneered. Then the questions came like bullets. Who are your partners? Where did you get the stuff? How many times have you sold? Confess, cooperate, and we will go easy on you. I shook my head wildly, sweat soaking my shirt. I do not know. I do not have any partners. This is the first time I have ever seen those things. The questions grew more aggressive, more suffocating. My head was spinning. The room seemed to whirl around me. I wanted to scream, to slam the table, but my hands were cuffed. I could only sit there and take it. Suddenly the door opened and Daniel walked in. He stood behind the detectives with his arms crossed, face as cold as the night before. My heart clenched. "Daniel, I did not do this," I whispered, hoping he would save me. But he just looked at me and said flatly, "Adam, confess. Cooperate and you will get a lighter sentence. If you do not, you will go away for life." I stared at my brother in utter despair, tears spilling over. "What are you saying? I was framed. You are my brother. You are supposed to believe me." I tried again, voice breaking, reminding him of our childhood, how he used to protect me from bullies at school. But Daniel did not flinch. His eyes were like stone. "The evidence is clear, Adam. Do not make this worse." He turned and walked out, leaving me completely shattered. The interrogation ended. They dragged me back to the cell. I collapsed onto the cot, my mind blank. Why was my brother doing this? He had been my hero. The cop with the shiny badge. Now he was pushing me deeper into hell. I kept thinking about that anonymous call. Was it possible Daniel knew something, or was he forced into this? No. His face had shown no hesitation. Fear started creeping in. I curled up in the corner, trembling. The next day, they told me I had visitors. My heart raced. Mom. It had to be Mom. But when I walked into the visitation room and saw them through the thick glass, it was both my parents. Mom sat there, eyes red and swollen hands shaking as she held a tissue. Dad sat beside her, face as cold as ever. I sat down and grabbed the phone. "Mom, I didn't do this," I whispered right away. But Dad cut me off, voice harsh. "Adam, you've been nothing but a burden your whole life. Now you've disgraced the entire family. Confess so we don't have to carry this shame anymore." I froze as if I had been slapped. "Dad, how can you say that I didn't do anything?" He shook his head and kept going. "You've always been weak, always needing someone to protect you. You messed up. Own it. Don't drag the whole family down with you." His voice was ice cold. No concern, no encouragement. I looked at him, my heart breaking. "Dad, I'm your son." Mom burst into tears. "Adam, I believe you. He'll find a way to help you. He'll hire a lawyer," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. But Dad immediately shut her down. "Mary, the evidence is overwhelming. He has to face the consequences." He pulled her up, not letting her say another word, and led her out. I watched them go, tears pouring down my own face. The visitation room felt empty, leaving me alone with the pain. The news spread like wildfire. Police officers, younger brother arrested for drugs during Christmas dinner. Photos of me in handcuffs, pale under the flashing lights, went viral on social media. Friends, neighbors, co-workers, everyone turned away. No calls, no messages. I could imagine my co-workers whispering behind my back, neighbors pointing at our house, old friends deleting my number. In that cramped cell, I sat curled up completely broken. Even though I knew I was innocent, I couldn't see any way to prove it. The evidence from the arrest was airtight. My statements could be twisted. Who would believe me? Not even Daniel. My own brother didn't believe me. I thought about my old life, the simple job coming home to hug Mom, fixing cars with Dad on weekends. Now everything was destroyed. I hugged my knees, shaking fear, eating away at me every second. The whole world had turned its back on me. My family, society, and even I was starting to doubt myself. On the second night in jail, real terror set in for the first time. Lying on that hard, freezing cot, listening to the wind howl outside the window, I thought I might never get out. Is this the end of my life? Prison disgrace, loneliness forever. Tears fell again, but this time they were tears of pure despair. I prayed for a miracle, but deep down I knew this hell had only just begun. The days that followed passed like one long, unending nightmare. I remained locked in that cramped cell, eating tasteless meals, listening to the shouting and screaming of other inmates echoing through the walls. Just 1 week so fast, I wasn't mentally prepared at all. The quantity of drugs seized was substantial enough to classify me as a serious offender. And the fact that I was the younger brother of Daniel Walker, a well-known police officer in St. Louis, turned the case into a media circus. They made my story front-page news with sensational headlines. Family torn apart by drugs officer arrests. Own brother. Days before Christmas. When I was escorted to the courthouse, a swarm of reporters crowded the entrance. Camera flashes blinded me. Voices shouted my name. My heart pounded. Cold sweat broke out despite the freezing winter air. Why was everything happening so quickly I wasn't ready to face judgment? The courtroom was large but suffocating. Rows of polished wooden benches reeking of cheap perfume from the packed gallery. The judge, a stern old man with gold-rimmed glasses, sat high on the bench looking down like a god of fate. I sat in the defendant's chair, wrists loosely cuffed, wearing a gray prison jumpsuit, feeling like a caged animal. My lawyer sat beside me, nervously flipping through papers. The prosecutor, a sharp, middle-aged woman with her hair in a tight bun and a voice like a blade, stood and presented the charges. She projected images of the evidence onto a huge screen, those opaque white packets gleaming under the flashlights from that night. The defendant, Adam Walker, was caught in possession of a large quantity of illegal narcotics, sufficient for distribution. She declared, her voice echoing through the room. She read Daniel's report, my own brother's words in meticulous detail. The anonymous tip, the search of my car and jacket, the discovery of the drugs. The testimony of the other officers followed, every detail matching perfectly as if it had all been scripted. I sat there feeling cornered. No way out. Every photo, every word was another brick in the prison wall being built around me. My lawyer tried to counter, but it was painfully weak. He argued that the anonymous call was suspicious, that someone could have planted the drugs. There is no direct evidence of intent to distribute, he said, voice slightly shaking. The prosecutor cut him off instantly, caught red-handed with the substances in his personal vehicle and clothing. That is the clearest evidence possible. That is the clearest evidence possible. Everything tilted heavily toward the prosecution. The court grew even more suspicious of me. The judge nodded. The gallery murmured. I felt like a lamb surrounded by wolves with no chance to fight back. Every time I tried to speak in my own defense, it only made things worse. When the prosecutor questioned me directly, I stammered I did not do anything. Someone put those packets in my car in my pockets. But she shot back immediately, her tone cold and mocking. That is the standard denial of a first-time offender. There is zero evidence to support the defendant's claims. Soft, cruel laughter rippled through the courtroom. My face burned. My heart raced. I wanted to scream that I was innocent, that this was a conspiracy, but my words were nothing more than whispers lost in the heavy air of the courtroom. My lawyer tugged my sleeve and whispered, "Do not say anything more. Let me handle it." but I knew he was drowning too. The trial dragged on for some time, yet every hour felt like a year. Endless questions mounting evidence and fear growing inside me like a tumor. Then came sentencing day, the moment I dreaded most. The courtroom was packed, not a single empty seat. Reporters crowded the back cameras, flashing non-stop whispers, buzzing like a disturbed hive. The air was thick with tension. The smell of sweat and perfume made it hard to breathe. I was led in and sat in the defendant's chair, hands trembling. I looked around and saw Daniel and my father George in the front row, faces cold as ice. They would not meet my eyes, just leaned in and whispered to each other, sharing secrets I was never meant to hear. My heart ached. My father and brother, once my pillars, now sat there like strangers, as if they were simply waiting for the sentence to seal my fate forever. Didn't they feel any pain? Why were they not fighting for me? Beside them, my mother. Mary sat hunched over, face buried in her hands, sobbing. Her shoulders shook uncontrollably under the stares of everyone around her. She looked years older, more gray in her hair, her eyes swollen from endless crying. Her pain cut through me like a knife choking me. In that heavy moment, as the judge banged the gavel for order, I bowed my head trying to breathe. Then by chance I glanced toward the very back row and froze. There among the crowd of strangers sat the familiar old homeless man I used to see in the park near my house. He sat quietly, silver-bearded, unkempt, wearing the same tattered coat. My heart raced. Why was he here? The old man looked up, met my eyes, and smiled, a gentle, warm smile in the middle of that cold courtroom. He lifted a hand in a small wave as if to say, "It will be all right, kid." His eyes were full of kindness, just like all the times we had met. Every morning when I woke up, I stared at the stained ceiling and wondered what new pain the day would bring. A public defender was assigned to me, a young guy who looked fresh out of law school, thick glasses, voice trembling. He visited a few times, scribbled notes in a hurry, and promised he would do his best to prove my innocence. "We will focus on that anonymous tip," he said, but his tone lacked any real confidence. I nodded, yet deep down, doubt gnawed at me. With the caught red-handed evidence and the testimony from my own brother, how could we possibly win? A few weeks later, the preliminary hearing was scheduled. Just 1 week so fast, I was not mentally prepared at all. The quantity of drugs seized was substantial enough to classify me as a serious offender, and the fact that I was the younger brother of Daniel Walker, a well-known police officer in St. Louis, turned the case into a media circus. They made my story front-page news with sensational headlines. Family torn apart by drugs officer arrests. Own brother. Days before Christmas. When I was escorted to the courthouse, a swarm of reporters crowded the entrance. Camera flashes blinded me. Voices shouted my name. My heart pounded. Cold sweat broke out despite the freezing winter air. Why was everything happening so quickly? I was not ready to face judgment. The courtroom was large, but suffocating rows of polished wooden benches reeking of cheap perfume from the packed gallery. The judge, a stern old man with gold-rimmed glasses, sat high on the bench, looking down like a god of fate. I sat in the defendant's chair, wrists loosely cuffed, wearing a gray prison jumpsuit, feeling like a caged animal. My lawyer sat beside me, nervously flipping through papers. The prosecutor, a sharp, middle-aged woman with her hair in a tight bun and a voice like a blade, stood and presented the charges. She projected images of the evidence onto a huge screen, those opaque white packets gleaming under the flashlights from that night. The defendant, Adam Walker, was caught in possession of a large quantity of illegal narcotics sufficient for distribution, she declared, her voice echoing through the room. She read Daniel's report, my own brother's words, in meticulous detail. The anonymous tip, the search of my car and jacket, the discovery of the drugs. The testimony of the other officers followed every detail, matching perfectly as if it had all been scripted. I sat there, feeling cornered. No way out. Every photo, every word was another brick in the prison wall being built around me. My lawyer tried to counter, but it was painfully weak. He argued that the anonymous call was suspicious, that someone could have planted the drugs. "There is no direct evidence of intent to distribute," he said, voice slightly shaking. The prosecutor cut him off instantly, caught red-handed with the substances in his personal vehicle and clothing. "That is the clearest evidence possible. Why were they smiling? Why were they not fighting for me?" That betrayal cut deeper than any knife. I bowed my head lower, my cuffed hands shaking uncontrollably, fingers clenched so tightly the knuckles went white. I waited for the words, guilty imprisonment words that would obliterate my life. No job, no freedom, no future, only darkness. Just as the judge raised his gavel to bring it down, a powerful, unexpected shout exploded from the back of the room, startling everyone. "Stop! I have proof that he is innocent!" The raspy, determined voice sliced through the silence like a bomb. The entire room whipped around. Murmurs rose like a tidal wave. I jerked my head up, stunned heart pounding wildly. It was the homeless old man from the park. He had leapt to his feet, one arm raised high, silver beard trembling, tattered coat flapping. His face was flushed with emotion, but his eyes burned with resolve. Why was he doing this? I could not understand why the old man would risk himself like this. Yes, I had helped him, given him spare change, and an old jacket, sat and talked on tired evenings after work. But this was a courtroom, not the park. He was a stranger, a wandering old man. How dare he stand up for me here? My heart raced. A tiny spark of hope flickered amid the despair, but then doubt rushed in. What could he possibly have? Evidence or just empty words? George and Daniel spun around, faces turning crimson with rage, eyes murderous. Daniel shot to his feet first, flashing his gleaming police badge under the lights, voice booming. "This is disruption of court proceedings. Officers, restrain that man and remove him immediately." Several uniformed officers rose, hands on their holsters, moving toward the old man. The room erupted into chaos. Reporters snapped photos frantically, whispers turning into a roar. My mother Mary lifted her tear-streaked face, staring at the old man in bewildered shock. I sat frozen, unable to believe my eyes. Daniel, my own brother, was trying to silence the one person who might save me. Why was he panicking? His face had gone pale, his hands trembling despite his attempt to maintain authority. But the old man did not flinch. He stood tall, voice calm and steady. "Hold it. You cannot arrest me before I reveal the truth." Then, to everyone's astonishment, he slowly peeled off the fake silver beard, shrugged off the ragged coat, and tossed it onto the bench and wiped his face with a handkerchief, removing layers of dirt and masterful disguise that had hidden him for years. The courtroom fell into a stunned, breathless silence. The face revealed was not an old man's at all, a middle-aged man with short-cropped hair, sharp, intelligent eyes, and features I never thought I would see again. When George and Daniel saw that face, the blood drained from theirs. My father lurched to his feet, hands gripping the bench in front of him, mouth working soundlessly. Daniel staggered backward, face ashen, his police badge slipping from his fingers and clattering onto the floor. Tears burst from my eyes, instantly uncontrollable, as recognition hit me like a thunderbolt. It was Uncle Frank Walker. George's younger brother, the uncle who had vanished 5 years ago, presumed dead. We had even held a symbolic funeral when his body was never found. The uncle I had adored as a child, the one who told adventure stories, taught me to fish by the river, shielded me from Dad's harsh words. And he was the old man from the park I had been giving money to. Old coats, late-night conversations, memories flooded back like a tidal wave. All those evenings in the park when he listened to me complain about work, about family, offering gentle wisdom. "Adam, you have a good heart. Never let anyone take that from you." I had never recognized him. The disguise had been flawless. But those kind eyes, now I understood. He had been watching over me all this time, protecting me from afar. I sobbed aloud, voice breaking so the whole room heard Uncle Frank. "Is it really you, Frank?" Looked at me, smiled warmly, then turned to the court, his voice ringing clear and strong. "I am Frank Walker, brother of George Walker, and blood uncle to Adam Walker. I have been missing for 5 years, but I have returned today with evidence that proves my nephew is completely innocent. I demand the right to testify and present that evidence before this court." The courtroom exploded. Reporters scrambled, cameras flashed like lightning, voices rose in a storm. The judge pounded his gavel repeatedly for order, his own face stunned. He immediately ordered identity verification. Files were pulled. Assistants rushed to databases. Within minutes, he nodded gravely. "Identity confirmed. Frank Walker is who he claims to be. Officers, stand down. Mr. Walker, please approach the witness stand and present your evidence." At those words, George and Daniel turned ghostly white hands, shaking uncontrollably. They tried to sit calmly, but panic blazed in their eyes. My father whispered frantically to Daniel, face flushed and sweating. Daniel gripped the armrests until his knuckles went white, staring at Uncle Frank as though staring at a ghost. I sat there, heart-thundering, tears still streaming down my face. Why had Uncle been alive all this time? Why the disguise? And what evidence did he have that could clear my name? My mother was sobbing louder now, but they were tears of joy and disbelief, staring at her long-lost brother-in-law. "Frank, my brother-in-law is alive." The entire courtroom held its breath again as Frank walked to the center aisle, holding an old leather satchel ready to unveil the truth that would turn this entire sentencing upside down. Uncle Frank strode to the witness stand, each footstep ringing out firmly in the dead, silent courtroom. He set the old leather satchel on the evidence table and opened it slowly, deliberately, drawing out the tension. From inside, he pulled a tiny USB drive, a thick stack of yellowed documents, and a sleek black external hard drive. The entire courtroom erupted in an instant, murmurs rising like a wave. Reporters scrambling to write, camera flashes exploding non-stop. The judge banged his gavel several times for order. Silence. "Mr. Walker, you may proceed." I stared at my Uncle Hart, pounding a fragile spark of hope flickering through the lingering fear. "Please, Uncle, save me." Frank took a deep breath. His voice rang out, clear, steady, and powerful, like a seasoned detective recounting the biggest case of his life. "Your Honor, 5 years ago I was a private investigator working alongside the St. Louis police to dismantle the city's largest drug trafficking ring. During that investigation, I discovered that the people behind it were none other than my own brother George Walker and my nephew Daniel Walker." Those words detonated like a bomb. The room fell deathly quiet, then exploded into chaos. George shot to his feet, face crimson. "Lies! He is insane!" the judge roared. "Silence, Mr. Walker, or you will be removed." Daniel stayed seated, face drained of color, knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. I stared at them, heartbreaking. My father and brother involved in drugs. I could not process what I was hearing. Uncle Frank continued, calm but unrelenting. When I was about to report my findings to the authorities, George discovered what I knew. He threatened to kill me to keep me quiet. I had no choice. I faked my disappearance to save my life. I disguised myself as a homeless man, lived on the streets of St. Louis, and kept gathering evidence from the shadows. He paused, looked the judge straight in the eye, then turned to me with warmth in his gaze. Suddenly, everything clicked. All those evenings in the park when the old man listened to me talk about work, about family, saying, "Adam, you have a good heart." He had been protecting me, watching George and Daniel the whole time. Tears welled up again. Shock, gratitude, pain. 5 years on the streets alone just for this moment. To prove it, he plugged the USB into the projector. The huge screen lit up with grainy but unmistakable footage. The night before Christmas Eve. Daniel, my own brother, sneaking up to my car in the driveway. He opened the trunk, placed the white packets inside, then rummaged through my jacket hanging in the garage and stuffed more packets into the pockets. "This is video I recorded in secret," Uncle Frank explained. Daniel planted the drugs in Adam's car and jacket the night before the arrest. Daniel dropped his head into his hands, shoulders shaking. George shook his head frantically, stammering, "That is not me in the video." But the evidence was undeniable. I watched the screen, my chest tightening until I could barely breathe. My brother, he framed me. Why? It did not stop there. Uncle Frank played an audio file from the hard drive. George's cold, unmistakable voice filled the courtroom. "Sacrificing Adam is fine as long as we are safe. He is weak. He will not fight back." Then Daniel's voice. "Exactly, Dad. One anonymous tip is all it takes." The room froze in horror. The prosecutor, the sharp woman who had torn into me, sat pale and speechless. The judge's eyebrows shot up, his hand tightening around the gavel. Every eye turned to George and Daniel. They were unraveling. George jumped up again, frantic. "That is fabricated. Someone doctored the recording." The judge thundered, "Be quiet. You are adding contempt of court. Sit down." George collapsed back into his seat, sweating profusely, face cycling from red to ghost white. Daniel just stared at the floor. When the planting footage was replayed in slow motion, he buried his face completely. He knew there was no escape. Uncle Frank pressed on, voice growing stronger. He presented secret reports from the document stack. "George and Daniel are currently under federal investigation for their drug network. To divert attention, they decided to sacrifice Adam, an easy scapegoat, someone gentle who would not resist. He submitted bank records of money laundering through George's auto shop, massive transfers, fake invoices, hidden accounts. Adam was framed from the beginning," he concluded, voice trembling with emotion. "My nephew is innocent, and these documents will show everyone the truth." I broke down, completely sobbing harder than ever, shattered by the realization that the people I loved most had thrown me to the wolves to save themselves. Every happy family memory burned away in that moment. I remembered dinners together, Dad talking about the shop, Daniel bragging about his arrests. All of it a lie. I slumped in my chair, hands over my face, crying uncontrollably. How could they do this to me? In the gallery, my mother Mary let out a wail, hands shaking over her mouth as the truth crashed down. She stared at George and Daniel in pure horror, unable to believe the husband and son she had devoted her life to had sacrificed her gentlest child to protect themselves. She had cooked for them, stayed up nights when Daniel was sick, mended George's clothes. Now she sat, shattered, tears streaming. I wanted to run to her to say, "Mom, it is okay now. I will be all right." But the guards held me back. Her pain doubled mine. My heart felt like it was being crushed. Then the prosecutor stood, voice trembling. "Your Honor, in light of this new evidence, I move to stay the sentencing of Adam Walker and request the immediate arrest of George Walker and Daniel Walker for investigation." The judge nodded gravely. "Motion granted. Officers, take them into custody now." The courtroom erupted. Reporters surged forward, cameras, flashing, voices rising. Officers rushed the front row, cuffing George and Daniel right there in front of everyone. George struggled wildly. "This is a conspiracy. I am innocent." But they forced him down and dragged him away. Daniel did not resist. He just muttered under his breath toward Uncle Frank. How are you still alive?" They were hauled out amid shouts and blinding flashes. I collapsed against my chair, unable to process what was happening. After endless despair, the freezing jail nights, my father's, blame my brother's, cold eyes, the vicious public gossip, the truth had finally turned in my favor. I cried, but now the tears were mixed with relief and unbearable pain. Uncle Frank walked over, reached through the bailiff, and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Adam, you are free." Mom rushed forward the moment the cuffs came off, throwing her arms around me. "My baby, I am so sorry. I did not believe you," she whispered through sobs. I held her tight, crying into her shoulder. Reporters swarmed, questions flying, but everything felt like a dream. The betrayal from my own blood cut so deep I did not know how I would ever go on. But at least the prison nightmare was over. Or had a new one just begun? The next morning, everything unfolded like a dream. I was still lying in my cell, head foggy from the chaos of yesterday's trial, when the lock clanked and an officer stepped in. His voice was flat. "Adam Walker, you are being released." I lifted my head, certain I had misheard. "You have been cleared," he explained briefly. After the federal investigators verified every bit on Uncle Frank's USB and hard drive, no edits, no fakes, the prosecutor had filed an immediate motion to dismiss all charges against me. There was no doubt left. I was innocent. They released me on the spot while the final paperwork was processed. My heart pounded so hard I barely dared to believe it. Just yesterday I thought my life was over. Now freedom was waiting outside the door. I stood up on shaky legs and followed the officer out. The police station still smelled of burnt coffee and old paper, but this time I was not a prisoner. The front door swung open. Harsh St. Louis winter sunlight poured in blinding after days of darkness. I stepped outside, gaunt, unshaven clothes wrinkled and stale. Dark circles under my eyes, skin pale from despair and sleepless nights. Waiting on the steps was Uncle Frank. No longer wearing the fake beard or tattered coat, he just looked exhausted and worried. The face of a man who had been running for years, short silver hair, deep lines around his eyes, shoulders slightly stooped. He stood with his hands in his pockets, eyes red, staring at me. I froze for a second, unable to believe this was real. Uncle Frank, the uncle I thought was dead, the old man from the park who had been beside me all along. Then, like a dam breaking, I ran to him and threw my arms around him, sobbing uncontrollably. "Uncle Frank, thank you for clearing my name," I whispered, voice breaking, tears soaking his shoulder. Finally, someone had believed me, saved me, pulled me out of hell. He hugged me tight and rubbed my back. "Adam, I am so sorry. I let you suffer this long. It is over now, kid." We stood there on the police station steps, holding each other and crying like two lost children who had finally found their way home. Reporters lingered nearby, but in that moment the world contained only the two of us. We went back to the familiar house on the outskirts of St. Louis, the same house where the Christmas dinner had shattered. Mom had come home earlier and prepared a small meal, but her eyes were still red when she saw us. She threw her arms around Uncle Frank and whispered, "Brother-in-law, how are you alive? Why did you not come back sooner?" He gave her a sad smile and patted her shoulder. "Sister, I had to wait for the right moment. Now I will tell you everything." We sat in the living room where the Christmas tree still stood with a few glass ornaments dangling, a painful reminder of that terrible night. Uncle Frank poured water for everyone, took a deep breath, and began to speak in a low, steady voice, as if opening a secret book that had gathered dust for 5 years. 5 years ago, he said, while working as a private investigator, assisting the St. Louis police on a major drug case, he started tracing suspicious transactions. He followed shipments, bugged phones, and slowly discovered that the people running one branch of the ring were none other than George, his own brother, my father, and Daniel, his nephew. My brother. I could not believe my eyes, he said, voice trembling. George was laundering money through the auto shop. Daniel was using his badge to bury evidence and protect the operation. My chest tightened as I listened. How was this possible? Dad, the stern, patriarchal man I always thought was honest. Daniel, the family hero. When Uncle Frank was about to turn everything over to the feds, George found out. That night, Uncle overheard a conversation through a device he had planted. George and Daniel calmly discussing how to get rid of him, hire a hitman, stage an accident, anything to make him disappear. They talked about it like the weather, Uncle said bitterly. George said, "Frank knows too much. We have to take him out before he talks." My fists clenched so hard my nails dug into my palms. I could not believe my own father and brother had been willing to kill their own blood just to protect their profits. Part of me collapsed inside. Dad. Daniel. Were you monsters all along? I remembered Dad scolding me for being weak. Daniel mocking me for not being tough enough. Now I understood. They chose me as the sacrifice for exactly those reasons. Tears rolled down my face again. Mom pulled me close, crying too. How could they? How could they do this to their own family? Knowing some high-ranking officers had already been bought. Uncle had the bribery list. He could not safely report it. That same night I got my wife and daughter out. He said, eyes distant. I used every trick I knew. Multiple vehicles crossed state routes, fake names staying off cameras. I got them into temporary witness protection in another state, a place no one could find. He came back to St. Louis alone to keep gathering evidence, waiting for the safest moment to strike. I could not let that network keep destroying lives, he said. But George had put a price on his head. Once he was ambushed on the outskirts of town, shot in the shoulder, bleeding heavily. I hid in the woods, patched myself up, then went completely dark so I would not endanger my wife and daughter, he said, voice breaking. Unable to return to a normal life, he chose the perfect invisibility, a homeless man. No one notices the homeless. I lived near George and Daniel's routes, he said. Slept on park benches, ate scraps, but I never stopped watching. I planted bugs, filmed, secretly documented every deal. I remembered all those evenings with the old man in the park, how he listened to me talk about my day, about family. I wanted to be close to you, Adam, he whispered. I knew you were gentle, and I was terrified they would target you. My heart warmed even as it ached. He had sacrificed everything, his family, his health, his identity, just to bring justice. While gathering evidence, he discovered Daniel was under fresh federal scrutiny. The ring was about to be exposed. They needed a fall guy to misdirect the investigation. From the recordings, Uncle heard George give the order. If we have to sacrifice someone, it is Adam. He is weak. He is kind. And he will not fight back. Hearing those words, ice ran down my spine. I had never felt so small, so disposable in the eyes of the people who raised me. Why? Why me, Uncle? I whispered, voice cracking. He took my hand. Because you trusted them completely. Adam. And they knew it. Uncle Frank knew I was the next target. He tried to warn me indirectly in the park, but could not speak openly in case George was watching or had eyes on me. I could only drop hints, he said. Things like family is not always what you think, or be careful even with those closest to you. I remembered those exact words. I had thought they were just the ramblings of a lonely old man. He waited for the one moment it would be safe to reveal himself. My trial, when the media, the prosecutor, and the court were all present, and George had no chance to silence him first. I had to wait until it was safest. He said, eyes red. If I came out earlier, they might have killed me, and you would still be convicted. When Uncle Frank finished, the room fell into heavy silence. Mom held me tighter, tears falling silently. I stared out the window at the soft St. Louis snowfall, but inside me a storm raged. 5 years of disappearance, a story of sacrifice, danger, and quiet, fierce love. Uncle had risked his life to save mine, to save justice. And me, I had lost my family, or rather realized the family I thought I had never truly existed. Dad and Daniel were in jail awaiting their own trials. Mom was shattered. I squeezed Uncle's hand and whispered, "Thank you, Uncle. I am not alone anymore." He smiled, patted my shoulder. "Never again, Adam." But the silence was heavy because we both knew these wounds would take a very long time to heal. My life had turned a new page, yet the shadow of the past still loomed large. A little while later, while the air in the room was still heavy, Uncle Frank slowly stood up and reached for the same old leather satchel he had carried since yesterday. I watched him, a mix of curiosity and exhaustion in my eyes. "Uncle, is there something else you have not told us?" I asked softly, my voice still trembling from the earlier revelations. He nodded. His eyes were not filled with pain this time. They were shining with something else. Hope. He opened the satchel and carefully pulled out a thick packet of documents sealed with red wax and tightly bound with cord. The pages inside looked old, but well preserved, as if they had been guarded for years. He placed it on the coffee table in the center of the living room and spoke in a low, warm voice. "Adam, this is the trust fund your grandfather Albert Walker left specifically for you. For the past 7 years, I have been secretly managing it exactly as he instructed." I froze, staring at the packet like it was an object from another planet. A trust fund from Grandpa. Grandpa Albert Walker had died 7 years ago from a sudden heart attack. He had been a quiet man, but he always had a strange, magnetic pull on me. He lived alone in a small wooden house on the outskirts of town, made modest investments, and rarely got involved in family matters. But to me, he was the only real emotional anchor I ever had. Why would he leave me a trust fund? And why had Uncle Frank been the one managing it? "Uncle, you are saying, Grandpa left this for me?" I stammered, my trembling fingers brushing the papers. Mom, sitting beside me, widened her eyes and whispered, "Albert, he never said a word to me about this." Uncle Frank nodded and sat down next to me, speaking slowly. "Right before he passed, your grandfather called me to his bedside and entrusted me with this fund. He said, 'Only give it to Adam when he has been pushed to the absolute edge, when no one else is left to protect him, when he truly needs a completely new life. Only then.' I promised him I would keep it secret, and for 7 years I managed the investment so it would grow." His words exploded in my mind like another bomb. Grandpa knew. He foresaw that one day I would be driven into total despair. My heart pounded. A strange feeling crept in, warmth mixed with pain. I remembered Grandpa's deep knowing gaze whenever he looked at me, as if he could see straight into my soul. He never spoke of money. He only taught me about life. Now this trust fund felt like a message from beyond the grave. With shaking hands, I broke the wax seal and began turning the pages. Numbers danced before my eyes, meticulously recorded by lawyers and banks. The total value of the trust, 18 million USD, a fortune I had never even dreamed of. It included 6 million USD in cash safely held in banks, 5 million USD in blue-chip stocks from companies like Berkshire Hathaway and Intel, a large commercial plot on the outskirts of St. Louis worth 4 million USD, perfect for a shopping center or warehouse, and 3 million USD in a high-yield investment fund Grandpa had personally set up for me, compounding over the years. With every page I turned, my heart grew heavier. These were not just numbers. They were a legacy. They were love. Proof that my grandfather had seen worth in me when no one else did. All my life I had felt like the odd one out. Dad thought I was weak. Daniel outshone me in everything. Mom loved me but could not shield me. Grandpa had been the exception, but he died too soon, leaving an emptiness. Now this trust was his quiet declaration. "I saw you. I believed in you. I turned to the last page, heart racing. Tucked between the documents was a small yellowed envelope. On the front, in Grandpa's familiar, shaky but elegant handwriting, "To Adam, the grandson I was always proud of." My chest tightened. Proud of me. Me, the gentle, weak Adam. My fingers trembled as I opened it. The wax seal crumbled. Inside was a handwritten letter on thin, fragile paper that still carried the faint scent of old wood pine and the crackling radio from his cabin. I choked up the moment I read the first lines and began reading aloud, voice shaking so Mom and Uncle could hear. "Adam, if you are reading this letter, it means you are going through something no one else can help you with. Never forget. You are the only one in this family with the kindest heart. Do not let anyone crush that. I watched you grow up. I saw what you endured without ever complaining. You are not like your father or your brother. You have goodness. You have sensitivity they lack. That is not weakness, Adam. That is strength. I believe in you, Adam, and one day you will be the one to save this family in a way no one expects. Use this gift wisely. Build the life you deserve. Greater than I am proud of you always. Greater than Grandpa Albert." By the time I reached the end, I could not hold it together. My eyes burned. My chest felt crushed. He believed I would save the family. The same family that betrayed me. Tears fell freely, splashing onto the page and blurring the ink. I let the letter drop into my lap, hands shaking. All this time I had thought I was alone. Dad turned his back. Daniel framed me. The world condemned me. But right now I realized someone had believed in me long before everything collapsed. Grandpa had seen it coming. He had prepared an escape for me. In that instant, memories of him flooded back like a rushing river, pulling me into the past. I remembered weekend visits when Mom would drop me at his little wooden house on the edge of the forest outside St. Louis, filled with the smell of fresh pine and the crackling of his old jazz radio. It was the only place I could truly breathe, the only place I could be myself. No yelling from Dad, no mocking laughter from Daniel. Grandpa would sit in his rocking chair, pipe in hand, smiling as I ran to him. "Adam, you are here. Tell me how your day was." I would throw myself into his arms and pour out everything. Being bullied at school, Dad telling me I was not man enough. He listened without judgment, just nodding and stroking my hair. Even though we did not live together, Grandpa Albert noticed things about me no one else did. One look and he knew what sadness I was hiding behind a thin smile. When Dad had scolded me, when Daniel had teased me to tears, all he had to do was open his arms, and I became a little boy again, safe-loved. He taught me what my father never did. How to stand tall when others looked down on you. How to keep kindness even when misunderstood. And most importantly, that sensitivity is not weakness. "You have a heart stronger than anyone else in this house combined, Adam," he once said, ruffling my hair, his voice warm like a winter fireplace. While the rest of the family saw me as weak, Dad shouting, "Toughen up," Daniel laughing, "You are too soft. You will never amount to anything." Only Grandpa Albert saw what lay beneath the silence. Resilience. Decency. Honesty. The very qualities he believed would one day become the brightest light. He used to tell me about his own life, how he started poor, was cheated many times, but built his modest investment fund through honesty. "You will do even greater things than I ever did, Adam," he would say, eyes sparkling. Now this trust proved his words. He had prepared a future for me, knowing the family might one day fall apart. I sat there with the letter in my hands, tears falling unchecked. Those memories were sweet knives cutting through the pain to reveal hope. Grandpa, he had seen me. He had loved me in a way no one else ever had. While my father and brother pushed me toward prison, Grandpa reached out from the grave with a way out. I turned to Uncle Frank, eyes wet but brighter than they had been in weeks, and pulled him into a long, fierce hug, heavy, aching, but warm. A hug that said, all the humiliation, fear, and loneliness of the past days had finally been shared. He wrapped his arms around me, patting my back, voice thick with emotion. You are not alone anymore, Adam. You and I, we are going to take everything back. Our lives, justice, and trust. Mom sat beside us, crying too, her hand resting on our shoulders. The living room felt warmer, even as snow kept falling outside the window. This trust fund was not just money. It was Grandpa's reminder from beyond the grave. You are worthy. You are strong, and you can start again. Immediately after the arrest warrants were issued, George and Daniel were taken into custody for investigation. The news exploded like a bomb. Police officer aided drug ring. Father and son garage bosses arrested inside courtroom. I sat at home in the now cold, familiar living room watching TV with Mom and Uncle Frank. Every channel repeated the same footage on a loop. My father and brother in handcuffs being led out of the courthouse. An endless nightmare. Federal task forces working with St. Louis police raided multiple locations at once like a storm sweeping everything away. Uncle Frank, still in contact with prosecutors to hand over additional evidence, told me what was happening. They stormed Dad's auto shop, the same place where I used to help him fix engines on weekend afternoons. A secret warehouse was sealed off. Cardboard boxes filled with opaque white packets. Drugs were dragged out under the blinding flashes of press cameras. Dozens in the network were arrested. Unfamiliar drivers I had once seen at the garage. Fellow officers Daniel used to brag about as close buddies. George's hidden accounts were frozen. Millions in laundered money that Uncle Frank had tracked for 5 years. I sat at home watching it all on television, my heart shrinking with every report. In the days that followed, the media swarmed the city like a disturbed hive. The case dominated front pages from the Midwest Chronicle to the National News Network, labeled the darkest family scandal in St. Louis in a decade. I did not dare go outside, afraid of neighbors, stares, afraid of reporters, relentless questions. Mom cried non-stop, flipping through channels, watching the same images of George and Daniel being led away, heads bowed. How could they do this to you? She whispered, hands trembling around the remote. Uncle Frank stayed with us. He shared more details from the investigation based on his testimony and documents. Federal agents reconstructed the entire money laundering operation through the garage, drug trafficking from Guatemala across the border, and the times Daniel manipulated evidence to frame others, not just me, but several innocent people before me. They had done it many times, Uncle said bitterly. But with you, Adam, it was the worst. My blood ran cold. Daniel, the hero with the badge, was actually twisting the law. I remembered him telling stories of arrests while the family applauded. Now every word felt like poison. Months passed slowly like a sluggish river, carrying pain away while slowly easing the nightmares. The trial of George and Daniel opened on a chilly spring day. The courtroom was packed, reporters, lawyers, and curious onlookers from all over. Headlines screamed, "The Walker Family Trial." Police officer and father charged with drug trafficking. Uncle Frank, Mom, and I sat quietly in the back row, the 3 people most scarred by their crimes. I wore a simple shirt, clutching Mom's trembling hand. Uncle Frank sat on my other side, face grim, ready to face this final chapter. The large courtroom felt suffocating, smelling of old paper and cheap perfume. The judge, a stern, middle-aged woman, banged her gavel to begin. I looked at the defendant's bench. Dad and Daniel sat there, thinner after months in jail, faces, gaunt eyes, avoiding the gallery. George glanced at me for a second, his gaze full of anger, not a trace of remorse. Daniel kept his head down. My heart ached. They had once been my family. The prosecutor, the same sharp woman who had once accused me, stood and presented an avalanche of evidence. She played the video of Daniel planting drugs in my car on Christmas Eve, the footage crystal clear, causing gasps throughout the room. This is evidence tampering and fabrication to frame an innocent person, she declared, voice like steel. Next came financial records of money laundering through George's garage. Massive sums funneled through hundreds of fake accounts. Confessions from arrested members of the ring echoed over the speakers. George was the boss. Daniel covered for us. And the climax, the recording of George coldly saying, "Sacrificing Adam is fine as long as we are safe." Mom buried her face in her hands and sobbed when his voice filled the room. Daniel tried to blame his father. "Dad forced me. I was just following orders." George fired back. "He did it on his own. I did not know anything." Their selfishness and lack of remorse were laid bare before the court. No regret, only desperate attempts to save themselves. Their defense attorneys scrambled, but the evidence was overwhelming. I watched them torn between rage and pity. Why would they not admit it? Why not apologize to me, to Mom? Mom sat silently crying the entire time. She had never imagined the day her husband and son would be tried as two of the city's most dangerous criminals. She used to cook dinner for George every night, used to beam with pride at Daniel's badge. Now she sat trembling hands over her mouth. "Mom, are you okay?" I whispered, holding her tighter. She shook her head, tears streaming. "I still cannot believe they did this." Uncle Frank placed a hand on her shoulder. "We have to be strong, sister." The trial lasted several days, each one revealing more horrors. How many innocent people Daniel had framed. How many tons of drugs George had moved. I listened, heart frozen, flashing back to family dinners that now felt like lies. Finally, sentencing day arrived. The courtroom was more packed than ever. The judge stood, voice grave. George Walker, 40 years in prison for money laundering, drug trafficking, and conspiracy to commit murder. Daniel Walker, 32 years for aiding and abetting evidence tampering and planting false evidence to frame an innocent person. The sentences rang out like thunder. The room erupted, cameras flashing nonstop, voices rising. George and Daniel were cuffed and led away, faces pale and broken. George struggled weakly. Daniel walked with his head down, silent tears falling. I watched them one last time. That was my father, my brother, now prisoners. After the verdict, the three of us stood and quietly left the courtroom together. No words, just walking side by side, each carrying our own wounds. Mom cried silently. Uncle Frank sighed. And I felt empty. Outside, dozens of reporters surged forward, microphones raised. "Adam, how do you feel about your father and brothers?" Sentences I turned away. Uncle Frank shielded us. No comment. "Please give us space." The case became one of the biggest shocks in St. Louis history, not just for the scale of the drug ring, tons of narcotics, millions laundered, but for the family tragedy laid bare before the entire city. I went home, shut the door, and collapsed. I took a deep breath of cold winter air, feeling as though I had finally stepped out of the last shadow of my old life. Behind me, the family trial, testimony, sentences, betrayal. Ahead, a new life I never imagined. Freedom, the trust fund, and hope. The pain was still there, and I knew it would take a long time to heal. But for the first time, the future felt possible. Several months after the trial, my life slowly turned a new page, like an old book finally opening to the next chapter. The first days were hard. I still woke up every morning haunted by prison memories, by the cold eyes of my father and brother flashing across the TV screen. Public attention remained intense. Reporters still lurked outside the gate. But I began to learn how to live again. With the enormous $18 million USD trust fund Grandpa had left me, Uncle Frank and I decided to start a private security and investigation firm. We named it Walker Justice Services, specializing in helping victims who had been wrongfully accused and cooperating with police on drug cases. We used part of the fund to rent a small office in downtown St. Louis, buy surveillance equipment, and hire a few young investigators. I remember the first day we opened standing outside watching the sign gleam in the spring sunlight, thinking, this is the beginning. No longer the weak Adam. Now I am the man standing tall, just as Grandpa had taught me. The company grew fast thanks to Uncle Frank's vast experience and my own dedication. Uncle, with his 5 years living on the streets tracking criminals, handled the complex cases, planting bugs, analyzing evidence. I, still carrying the raw pain of being framed, poured my heart into the victims, listening to their stories, arranging legal help, even holding them, while they cried about their own nights in wrongful imprisonment. We became an inseparable duo, one seasoned and scarred from ambushes and years on the run, one resilient forged in personal hell. Our first case was freeing a young man framed for drug possession just like me. We obtained security camera footage proving he had been set up, and the court released him. Word spread. Clients flooded in, single mothers falsely accused of theft, business owners sabotaged by rivals. Revenue soared. We expanded the office and hired more investigators. One late night, after cracking a major case in cooperation with the police, taking down a small drug ring, Uncle clapped me on the shoulder. "Adam, you did great. Your grandfather would be proud." I smiled, eyes stinging with tears. The company was not just work. It was how I healed, turning pain into strength, making sure others never suffered the hell I had. With the trust money, I bought a spacious new house on the outskirts of St. Louis. 2 stories, green garden, small pool, and a bright living room overlooking a lake. I brought Mom Mary to live with me. After all the grief and collapse, we finally had a peaceful place to start over. She had lived too long in the old house filled with horrific memories, the place where the Christmas dinner fell apart, where her husband and son plotted betrayal. When she stepped into the new house, her eyes lit up. "It's so beautiful, son. I never thought I'd live in a peaceful place like this again." We decorated together, hung old photos of Grandpa Albert, planted flowers in the garden, cooked simple meals. She began smiling more, telling stories of her youth, even joining a local yoga club. That house became a real home. No more shouting from Dad George, no more cold stares from Daniel. Mother and son healed each other, slowly letting the darkness fade. I also bought a smaller house for Uncle Frank and his family when they returned from witness protection. After 5 long years in hiding, his wife Marjorie and daughter Sophie were finally safe to come home to St. Louis. The day they arrived, Uncle Frank and I waited at the airport, hearts pounding. When Marjorie and Sophie walked through the gate, Uncle Frank ran to them and broke down right there in the terminal. Tears streamed down his face, tears of joy after 5 years apart. I stood a few steps back, eyes burning at the sight of their reunion. After everything we had endured, seeing his family whole and safe again was worth more than anything money could buy. Time passed. The wounds slowly healed, like deep cuts carefully bandaged. The company thrived. Mom grew happier. Uncle Frank was reunited with his family. Everything felt like a brighter picture. I began sleeping through the night again, no longer tormented by prison nightmares or the flashing lights of that December 22nd. But the past still lingered. One day I decided to visit my father and brother in prison, too. Close that chapter to lay down the burden in my heart. The thought came suddenly one morning while I sat at my office desk looking at Grandpa's photo. Save the family in a way no one expects. I called Mom. "Mom, I want to visit Dad and Daniel in prison. Will you come with me?" She was silent for a long time, then nodded. "Yes, son. We should go to finish this." We prepared ourselves, my heart a mix of nerves and fear. This would be the first time I faced them since the trial, since learning the horrifying truth. Mom and I drove together to the Prison of Gray forbidding complex on the outskirts of St. Louis, surrounded by razor wire and towering guard posts. The air inside was cold and sterile. Harsh neon lights stretched down endless corridors, making everything feel alien and cruel. We passed through security and sat in the visitation room, a small space with a steel table, thick glass partition, and an old telephone. My heart pounded. Cold sweat broke out despite the winter chill. Mom sat beside me, her trembling hand gripping mine. What am I doing to forgive or to face the pain? One last time George Walker, my father, was brought in first. He looked worn gray. Prison uniform, unkempt beard, but his eyes still carried the same arrogant hardness. He sat across from us, picked up the phone and stared through the smudged glass. Adam, what are you here for? To gloat. His voice was harsh. No greeting, no warmth. Daniel followed shortly after, face gaunt, eyes red from sleepless nights, and regret hair messy. He sat beside Dad, glanced at me, then looked down. The tension was unbearable, like a string stretched to its breaking point. George stared at me, then immediately launched into the same old script as if he had rehearsed it for years. His voice was venomous. If you hadn't been so weak, if you'd been more like Daniel, stronger, tougher, none of this would have happened. I did everything for this family. Still no remorse, no apology, just cold, shameless denial. I was framed Adam. I didn't do anything wrong. It was Frank, my own brother, who set me up. He slammed his fist on the steel table. The clang echoed through the room as if he were clinging to the last scraps of his lies. I looked at him and felt nothing. No anger, no pain, just emptiness. I realized the man in front of me had never truly been a father. He had only ever used his children as tools. Mom sat silently crying beside me, squeezing my hand tighter. Daniel was different. For the first time since his arrest, my brother finally looked up. His eyes were tormented, brimming with unshed tears. Adam, I was wrong. His voice cracked. I'm sorry. Dad manipulated me, but I should have stopped. I'm sorry for what I did to you, for sending you to jail. The apology hung in the air raw sincere, and it twisted something deep inside me. Daniel, the idol who taught me how to kick a soccer ball, who told heroic police stories at the dinner table, now sat broken before me. I was silent for a long time, looking at the two men across the glass. One who would never take responsibility, George still blaming the world and me, and one who was finally facing the weight of his guilt. Daniel head bowed, tears falling. The visitation room felt frozen. Only our heavy breathing and Mom's soft sobs filled the space. Finally, I spoke, calm, steady, but unwavering. I took a slow breath and finally spoke, my voice steady. I don't hate you anymore, Daniel. I forgive you, but I won't see you again. I turned my eyes to the man beside him. And Dad, live with the choices you made. This ends here. George opened his mouth to argue, his face flushing red, but no words came. He just sat there, glaring, still clinging to his pride even as the world crumbled around him. Daniel bowed his head, tears dripping onto the steel table, his voice cracking. Adam, thank you for forgiving me. I stood, placed my hand on the glass one last time, and told them I would live my own life now, free from their shadows. Then I turned and walked out of the visitation room, leaving behind one man who would never change, and another who was only beginning to pay the price. As the heavy iron door slammed shut behind me, I walked down the cold corridor, feeling lighter than I had in years, like a 1,000-pound weight had finally lifted from my chest. Mom walked beside me, wiping her tears. My son is so strong. We stepped outside into the cool spring breeze, and for the first time, I breathed deeply without pain. A new life lay ahead. Mom Mary by my side, Uncle Frank as my true family, a growing investigation company, and a future built on the foundation of the trust fund Grandpa Albert left me. I thought of Grandpa's letter. You will save the family in a way no one expects. Maybe forgiveness was that way. Maybe walking away was too. I didn't know. But I did know this. I was finally free. A year after the case finally closed, my life had completely transformed, like a storm had passed, leaving a clear blue sky. Walker Justice Services was now firmly established with a long waiting list of clients and a reputation spreading far beyond St. Louis. I began speaking at community events, sharing my story to raise awareness about wrongful convictions and the dangers of drug networks. At one anti-drug community seminar in downtown St. Louis, I met Laura Pierce, a young, warm-hearted social worker whose smile lit up the room and whose green eyes sparkled with genuine compassion. She stood on stage talking about helping people struggling with addiction, her voice gentle yet powerful. "We don't just save their bodies," she said. "We save their souls." I sat in the audience, my heart stirring. Her words, they were about healing, hope after destruction. A journey like mine. After the talk, I approached her nervous but drawn in by something I couldn't explain. "Miss Pierce, your story. It's a lot like mine. I was falsely accused of drug charges once. Now I help others going through the same thing." She smiled, eyes lighting up. "Adam Walker. I've read so much about you. You're incredibly brave." We talked for hours about her father whom she lost to addiction and about everything I had lost to betrayal. We talked about our shared drive to heal hers through social work and mine through investigations. We quickly discovered how much we had in common, like two missing puzzle pieces, finally clicking into place. Our first dates, quiet coffee walks in the park, were filled with butterflies. My heart raced when she laughed, when she held my hand and said, "Adam, you are stronger than you know." Laura became the soft light that slipped into the darkest corners of my soul, helping me step out of the past and dare to believe in the future again. The following year, Laura and I were married in a small but love-filled ceremony. Just close friends and real family. Uncle Frank, Aunt Marjorie Sophie, and Mom Mary. We held the ceremony in the backyard of our new home under the warm summer sun, surrounded by roses Mom had planted. Laura walked toward me in a simple white dress, her eyes shining with happy tears. "Adam, I love you for who you are, strong from the heart." I slipped the ring on her finger, voice trembling. "Laura, you are my hope. Together we will heal." The ceremony was simple but overflowing with laughter. No extravagance, just pure warmth, the way a real family should be. When our first daughter was born, we named her Hannah in memory of Grandpa Albert. Our once quiet refuge after the storm now echoed with a child's laughter, sweet baby coos, and tiny feet pattering across the floor. Hannah had her mother's green eyes and my gentle smile. Every night I held her close and whispered, "I will protect you forever, my love." Mom. Mary became the happiest grandmother, caring for Hannah every day, singing her the same lullabies she once sang to me, her voice warm and tender. "Grandma loves you, Hannah. You are the new light of this house." Her wounds slowly faded beneath her granddaughter's giggles. Watching her cradle Hannah, I thought, this is redemption, a new family making up for the old losses. The company Frank and I built grew strong like an ancient tree, sprouting new branches after a storm. We partnered with the St. Louis police rehab centers and charities to support victims of false accusations and abuse of power. Our reputation spread across Missouri, from St. Louis to Springfield. People came to us carrying hope. We cracked major cases, freeing a teenager wrongfully jailed for drugs, helping women framed by ex-husbands in bitter divorces. Uncle Frank led the dangerous fieldwork. I handled the emotional support. Newspapers praised us. Walker Justice Services from Victim to Hero. I smiled when I read it, then turned to my uncle. None of this would have happened without you, I told him. He clapped my shoulder. Adam, you are the soul of this company. From everything we had endured, Uncle Frank and I founded the Hope Reborn Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping people framed in drug cases, getting them into rehab, helping them rebuild, and giving them a second chance at life. We funded it with part of the trust, partnered with treatment centers, provided free lawyers, and offered job training. The foundation quickly took off, saving dozens teens lost to addiction, mothers falsely accused. One case moved me deeply. A young man just like I once was, framed by so-called friends. We got him clean, helped him find a job. He hugged me crying, "Adam, you saved my life." I cried too, thinking of the old me. The foundation became my legacy, not just saving others, but saving my own soul, turning pain into purpose. That Christmas, thick snow fell over St. Louis, but warm, golden lights covered every corner of our new home, turning it into a glowing sanctuary. The whole family gathered. Uncle Frank with Aunt Marjorie and Sophie laughing brightly. Mom Mary, now a joyful grandmother. Laura, my wife, and little Hannah just learning to say Daddy in the sweetest lisping voice. We gathered around the table, the scent of roasted meat and cinnamon cookies filling the air, the Christmas tree sparkling with glass ornaments. No trace of that horrific night years ago. Laughter rang through the house. Sophie playing with Hannah, Aunt Marjorie telling cooking stories. Uncle Frank roaring with laughter when Laura teased him about his old homeless disguise. I stood quietly for a moment, taking in every beloved face. The people who truly loved me without betrayal, without selfishness. Suddenly I remembered that Christmas Eve long ago, handcuffed sirens, flashing lights. My mother's sobs as I was dragged away like a criminal. Tears welled up, but not from pain. From gratitude. Now it was Christmas again, but I was surrounded by light. Held in the arms of those who deserve to be called family, not by blood, but by love. I raised my glass, looking at the flickering candles on the table, and spoke, voice low but full of emotion. We cannot choose the family we are born into, but we can choose the family we keep. Never let the cruelty of others define your worth. And if life throws you into darkness, become your own light first. For a few seconds, everyone was silent, my words hanging in the warm air. Then soft applause broke out. Uncle Frank looked at me with proud, misty eyes. Adam, you have grown up. Mom wiped away tears and smiled. My son, your grandfather would be so happy. Laura squeezed my hand under the table and whispered, You are the light of my life. That Christmas night, I finally understood that the wounds which once tried to destroy me were the very things that made me stronger and led me to the real family I was always meant to have. Snow fell softly outside the window, but inside warmth spread everywhere, and I knew my life had truly begun.